It's now time to take a look at news stories making headlines around the globe, and we begin right here at home. As the Director General of the World Trade Organization, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, yesterday hailed President Bola Tinubu's efforts towards stabilizing the Nigerian economy. Okonjo-Iweala, a former two-time Nigerian Minister of Finance and coordinating Minister of Economy, gave the commendation during an interview with journalists after a closed-door meeting with President Tinubu. Also yesterday, at a separate event that saw the launch of a $50 million Women Exporters in the Digital Economy Fund in Abuja, the WTO Director General tasked the West African country and Africa by extension to tap into the $4.25 trillion global digital trade to enhance its fortunes. She also advised that government should create social safety nets to cushion the effects of the economic reforms on the citizenry.
So we think that the president and his team, and we just exchanged with him, have worked hard to stabilize the economy. And you cannot really improve an economy unless it's stable. So he has to be given the credit for the stability of the economy. So the reforms have been in the right direction. What is needed next is growth. We now need to grow the economy, and we need to put in social safety nets so that people who are feeling the pinch of the reforms can also have some support to be able to weather the hardship. So that's the next step. How do we build social safety net to help Nigerians cushion the hardship they're feeling? And then how do we grow the economy so we can create more jobs and put more money in people's pockets? These are issues that we discussed with Mr. President.
Well, still on the economy, Minister of Finance and Coordinating Minister of the Economy, Wale Edun, says Nigeria's economy remains resilient, driven by key sectors such as trade, telecoms, construction and transport. Despite inflation and underperformance in oil production, Edun projects steady growth, with the government aiming for 7% growth rate by 2027. Arise News correspondent Frank Omalape reports.
In his 2025 mid-year review, Minister of Finance and Coordinating Minister of the Economy, Wale Edun, paints a picture of cautious optimism, highlighting broad-based growth in trade, telecoms, construction and transportation, which he says is now the fastest-growing sector.
The growth has been broad-based, led by trade, communications and construction, with the fastest growing areas being rail transport, electricity and oil refining, and as well as crop production. Agriculture is recovering. The oil sector showing some of the diversification that is actually occurring. The oil sector is just less than 4% of GDP. Inflation remains elevated, though it is moderating. It is down to 22.22% as at June.
On the fiscal side, government revenues rose by 37.4% in the first half of the year, a key boost as the administration rolls out ambitious development plans. However, challenges persist in the oil sector. While the budget benchmark stands at $75 per barrel, actual market prices hover around $67. Average daily oil production also lags at 1.67 million barrels, short of Nigeria's 2.06 million per quarter.
In the oil and gas sector, average production in the first half of 2025 was 1.67 million barrels per day. Significantly, that is below the 2.06 million barrels budgeted, and that is of note. The average crude price also, likewise, the budget was put at $75 benchmark. We've had an average price of $67 per barrel.
In the power sector, Edu confirms that all approvals are in place to clear over $4 trillion in legacy debts, part of plans to improve access to electricity for over 300 million people under a World Bank-backed initiative.
Under the Mission 300 initiative of the World Bank and the African Development Bank that supports providing electricity connectivity between now and 2030 to 300 million additional Africans. Nigeria is a key beneficiary, and this is unlocking investment in manufacturing, agro-processing and services as a result of greater access to electricity.
Looking ahead, The federal government is targeting 7% GDP growth anchored on rising investment, job creation, and stronger household incomes.
Gross revenues are up 37.4%, government revenues, in the first half of 2025 compared to 2024. Our medium-term goal, well advertised, is to get to 7% per annual growth, GDP growth, driven by critical investments by government, private investment, job creation, and higher incomes.
With rising revenues, stabilizing inflation, and a disciplined fiscal path, the government says the outlook is promising. But with oil production still below target, critical hurdles remain. Frank Omalape, Arise News.
Now, lastly, to labour issues, as the Nigeria Labour Congress has threatened a nationwide strike if the federal government fails to return what it claims to be billions of naira taken from workers' insurance contributions. It also demanded that the government fill the leadership gap in the country's Pension Regulatory Commission within a week. The NLC accused the federal government of siphoning 40% of contributions from the Nigerian Social Insurance Trust Fund into the National Treasury. The fund, which is financed by payroll deductions from millions of workers, is meant to protect them in the event of injury or job loss. However, the National Pension Commission argued that the contributory pension scheme remains secure and continues to grow as it kicked against claims of missing funds. The standoff comes amid broader disputes over pension management across the country. In July, a coalition of labor unions in Ogun State gave state officials 72 hours to halt the planned rollout of a contributory pension scheme, citing a 17-year backlog of unpaid contributions worth over 82 billion naira. They called for a return to the old pension system or a delay until the arrears are cleared. We continue to see pensions, Rufai, leading the conversation. Before it was the police, and now we're seeing it trickle into other sectors as well, and labor as a whole.
Yeah, the argument from the police differs pretty much from this. Like the argument I've made as regards the police case before is the fact that if you want to go back to a defined benefit scheme, by my calculation and the modeling I did, the first year is going to be about 4 trillion for the police alone. And as the year goes by, also with inflationary factors, definitely is going to increase. And when you look at it, can a government like this make that money where we fall short of our revenue projections from crude oil? Take, for instance, we projected about 17 trillion, but we just fell short. It's about 12 trillion now because price of crude oil really slumped on the international scene in comparison to the projections we had about $75 per barrel. We're having $65 per barrel. And this, I think there has to be more clarity. The government is saying that we've got nothing to do with their money. We're just going to keep it in the fund for them. They are saying they're trying to take it. And I think all of this comes from the long line of mistrust among government and labor itself. So I think a conversation will suffice. And this ITF has not really, said anything about it, but I think they should also engage labor in all of this as this strike is going on. Since they can show them that money. And some of the arguments, the pension fund have made is that workers do relieve their alert where they see how much they have in their pension funds, and that money is pretty much there. So if government is saying a certain portion will be kept aside, as an insurance policy for them, I think it's a conversation with labor that will smoothen that out. But as regards the comments on the economy made by Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, stabilizing, I want to be careful when I use that word stabilizing, because let's look at the parameters. Our debt to GDP ratio is already crossing the 50% mark. Formerly, it used to be about 20-something% in this country. At some point, we had a ceiling of about 40%. Today, it's crossing the 50% mark. So with all the reforms we have done, that they said, the reform was supposed to herald more money for government, less borrowing. We have borrowed a lot more at this point in time with all the reform. And we are seeing the effect of the borrowing on our economy. Yes, we are building up reserves, but don't also forget the fact that we are borrowing. So reserves can be over $40 billion, but we are also borrowing. And we have passed the 50% mark, borrowing to our GDP. That's, debt to GDP levels. When you also look at the parameters, stabilizing, this government has constantly made the argument that, that the Naira is stabilizing, finding a level of convergence. But I want us to introspect and look at that and narrow down. What's the true value of the Naira today? A lot of statistics based on purchasing power parity have posited that the true value of the Naira today should be around 1,000 Naira threshold or thereabout. In fact, the real exchange rate value, some people are saying, should be less than the 1,500 we have. And don't also forget that we are doing a managed float. So this 1,005 something we have is still because the government still intervenes in the market as at when due, but at least the disparity at which they're intervening is a lot different from the earlier regimes we used to have, which was just a fixed exchange rate and we have to defend to a fixed exchange rate, threshold. When you also look at the parameters as regards inflation, we still have very high inflation in this country. But also the inflation numbers currently doesn't even show the picture of what was happening, because based on the former parameters, inflation plateaued at about 34%. And we had to rejig the way we calculated inflation and the inflation basket for the numbers to come down. But even if the headline inflation keeps, going down, we've had some trickle down in the numbers. When you look at the month-on-month inflation, it's another story entirely. The cost of things are still going down. You have a pass-through effect of this inflation into the economy. And that's why when we talk about 1 trillion economy, I keep saying it's practically not possible. See, go and check all the literatures. Fact check me. Check all the literatures. For you to double your GDP in 10 years, you must have about a 7.1, 7.2% growth. So you can go and look at all the literature. That's what all the economic literature say. So when you look at it deeply, we're not growing at that level now. Well, 1 trillion economy in the next 5 years. It's going to be a far, but it's good to have hope, have considerations. But also, and in reply to one point you raised yesterday, that we might have big GDP numbers, but the money might not trickle down and the money might not go through the economy. And that brings me to the point of the Gini coefficients. A very uneven society. But have we had uneven society in the past, Vimba? Yes, we have. In fact, Sweden is a classical example. Sweden used to be one of the most uneven society, but how did they do it? To become the level at which they are, they taxed a lot of the rich, worked a lot of wealth redistribution, increased wages, increased skill of the workers, ensured that unions became stronger, give a lot more rights to the people to be able to balance out the economy. And that's why when you go to an average Scandinavian country today, tax rates are on the increase to be able to take money and pressure off the rich. So I think to a large extent, apart from conditional cash transfers like Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala is talking about, to be able to remove the effect of all of these policies and all of that, we should now have a proper wealth redistribution mechanism where we take a lot more wealth out of the elite class and redistribute it. I know the counter-argument the elite class will make is that we are the ones that provide the job. We need the wealth to be able to provide the job. But most of the time, the elite look for safe havens to keep the wealth.
Okay, where do I start from? Let me start with the pensions scheme. Now, when the contributory pension scheme was introduced, you take a percentage in terms of contributors by the workers, and then the employers contribute a particular percentage to protect the pensioner, to protect jobs, to ensure survival. It was meant as a critical national infrastructure to protect people who may have retired from the service. It is therefore disappointing, frustrating to hear that this same pension scheme that was introduced, I think, during the administration of President Olusegun Obasanjo, is now a source of agony for many Nigerians. This is not the first time that this will happen. It was so mismanaged that the military decided that they would rather pull out of it and return to the old pension scheme. They succeeded. Retired soldiers succeeded. Now, since they succeeded in that regard, we have not had them going on strike or pensioners, retired soldiers, going to the streets and saying they were having issues with pensions. Second, the police pensioners also came forward and said, look, we don't want this contributory pension scheme. They just protested not too long ago. In July, an umbrella organization of pensioners, I think from Ogun State, also raised questions about the management of the contributory pension scheme. Clearly, there is an issue with the management, the administration of the contributory pension scheme. This is what has coalesced into the Labour Congress, the Nigerian Labour Congress, now wading into the matter, and two principal allegations. One, that money is being diverted from the pension fund, from the contributory scheme, into the revenue of government, which is not the intendment of the Enabling Act. Second, both the Labour Congress and NECA are also saying that, look, there's no governing board for the for PENCOM, the Pension Commission, and that in itself is in violation of the Enabling Act establishing PENCOM. These are the two major issues. And now they have served notice, the Labour Congress in particular, of 7 days, after which they intend to go on strike. Now, look, we don't want a situation whereby government hears that, oh, we will go on strike. After all, the other day, nurses said they will go on strike. Those ones even gave 14 days ultimatum. It was at the last point that the government intervened and tried to appeal to the nurses and midwives to suspend their strike. Now, the issues here are about transparency and accountability and the interest of the pensioner. We always say that you can measure the integrity of a country in terms of how it treats people who have left the government or who have left service, who are retired, and how those persons, retired, and the vulnerable are treated. The reality that we have in Nigeria, to put it editorially, is that people who are disadvantaged are not properly treated, whether they are physically challenged or they are retired persons or they are persons facing other circumstances, because this system is not structured to take care of people who are out of the loop. And I think that the federal government should not wait till the expiration of the deadline. It should engage the various stakeholders and respond to critical questions that have been raised. We are told that it's not the regulator's job to appoint a board for PENCOM. Well, if it is the responsibility of the federal government should act so accordingly. Now, to the economic issues, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala was in Nigeria originally to launch this $50 million fund with regard to getting Nigerian women into the digital space. And the main proposition is that Nigerian women need to be further empowered. And I think that on the surface of it, that greater involvement, immersion in the digital space, even for Nigerian women and other categories, is an important proposition. And I think that we should not lose sight of the major mission to Nigeria. Now, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, who is Director General, second time, of the WTO, is an international diplomat. No one should expect that she will go to the president of Nigeria and tell him anything otherwise. As an international diplomat, yes, she will echo, and what she's done is not even original. She simply echoed IMF World Bank, Article 4 consultative session outcome, saying that, President Tinubu's reform is going very well, and that those reforms are important and all that. But both the IMF and the World Bank added the same caveat about the need for social safety nets. She said exactly the same thing. She said, okay, the reforms are working, but now we need growth. In other words, she's also saying the same thing that the IMF and World Bank said, that we need to do more. So when Minister Edun comes on the sidelines and says, oh, we are doing well, the budget is doing well, we are, paying attention to all regular payments and all that, that's government talk. The emphasis is on growth, which Dr. Okonjo-Iweala pointed out. How do we grow this economy? And the counter-argument is that, is there enough productivity in this economy to ensure growth? I've consistently said there is no enough productivity. And then we're still a monocultural economy. The bulk of what we get is still from oil. That's why every day, even when Rotus comes around, we are watching what is the oil benchmark today, how is Brent crude doing, how is WTI doing. We need to do a lot more in terms of expanding this economy, making it grow. 3.4, 3.5% growth is not enough. Those who know the subject have said, look, can we get to Nigeria to a double-digit growth level, which was where this economy was going at a certain time. Removing fuel subsidy and having additional revenue, yes, may solve initial problems, but there are more fundamental problems that an international diplomat will not stand in front of President Tinubu and spell out. So productivity, one. And then there are many agencies of government that we need to look at. Look, yesterday we were discussing Ajakuta, steel and mill. What are they doing in that industry? Is the minister there even aware of what the challenges are or what his basic assignment is? Yesterday we were talking about revenue and the revenue generating agencies. I made a point about how Okonjo-Iweala, as Minister of Finance and Coordinating Minister of the Economy, tried to address those issues. Have they made any attempt to even consult Okonjo-Iweala and say, well, you were here before. You faced this same challenge. What did you do? So because we keep, who was it now? I think it was Professor Wole Soyinka, who talked about the recursive cycle of stupidity, whereby you do the same thing all the time, you don't get results, and you look like stupid, as in the Mobius strip. We call it in literature, from Wole Soyinka's The First Stage, the Mobius strip. But that's maybe too arcane for me to be explaining on television. But the point is that, government needs new ideas to achieve that objective of growth that Dr. Okonjo-Iweala pointed out. So it's not enough to say we have stabilized the economy. You have stabilized the economy. That's why the international diplomat was saying you have to provide social safety nets. There are people we see on a daily basis who are saying they are groaning, that there is hardship in the land. They cannot survive under these same reforms that are working. The last common denominator is what the ordinary man thinks, how the ordinary man feels, how the ordinary man survives. When there is prosperity in your house and in my house, and Rufai, I think, is looking for prosperity, even if he doesn't have any big body.
He has people he looks after.
Which big body does he have?
Dependents.
Okay, but the point I'm making is that we just want a country where everybody is prosperous and safe, and we are not relying on statistics, we are relying on reality. And there is that social safety net that everyone from Okonjo-Iweala to IMF and World Bank have asked for.
Absolutely. I think, we've emphasized this point severally, which is that at the end of the day, reforms are for people, so they must have a human face. Reforms are not for the joy of looking at glowing statistics. They are for the comfort, the prosperity, and the well-being of the people. So I think the statements from Dr. Okonjo-Iweala were certainly well placed in that I believe they call it the sandwich strategy, where you lead with a compliment and then you slip in your little bit of very well packaged constructive criticism before closing your sandwich with another slice of bread, which will be another compliment, which is, of course, all in line with how to communicate in diplomacy. I was quite excited about programs being rolled out, especially in the digital economy, because there's a lot of momentum that we're seeing in that space. Initially, there was a bit of a slow start when we saw the launch of IDICE, that's investment in digital and creative economy in 2023. But now we're seeing one of the biggest developments, in my opinion, is that there's progress with a 90,000-kilometer fiber network that is supposed to cover the whole country. And what this will allow us is it will allow us to push our internet penetration higher. Because as of the latest statistics from the NCC, just slightly under half of Nigeria is connected to the internet. So while we're saying that Nigeria, or Africa actually was the comment from the DG, only accounts for just about 1% of digital trade, it's good to see that some of the supportive mechanisms are also coming into play. Because of course we can't speak of digital trade without internet. Is it accessible? Is it affordable? So we're seeing steps in that direction from the Ministry of the Digital Economy, and we continue to look forward to seeing more developments. And of course, sitting down with the women and ensuring that those women who qualify, I believe it was 67 of them, have benefited from this program that will be able to grant them $5,000 each, as well as support for their businesses for 12 months. So that is fantastic, and it's great to see that for Dr. Okonjo-Iweala, charity truly does begin at home. On comments around stability, well, in essence, in economics, often we relate stability to predictability. So the debate here is this economy now predictable? Because some might say that it's stable at an elevated position, but some might say that predictability is still uncertain. If you look at our inflation numbers, yes, there's a downward trend, but with all the other factors that come in, we have flooding in our food productive states. The oil price has stabilized recently, but we're still not sure about, any potential shocks coming since the situation in the Middle East and Donald Trump policies and so forth continue to affect this. So the question is it predictable? How predictable are global economies at the moment? I think those are the factors that we need to put together. However, it's undeniable that if it is said to be stable, it's certainly so at a very elevated cost and at a high cost to the average citizen. Very quickly, I'll go to the comments from the Minister of Finance and Coordinating Minister of the Economy, who in essence said that our oil output, our oil production, is in a better place from where we were last year, but still not where we'd like to be. So we're seeing an improvement from 2024 numbers. In 2025, in January and June as well, I believe we were able to meet our OPEC quota, which is 1.5 million barrels per day. However, the ambitious target of 2.06 million is still somewhat of a far cry. Other issues to consider as well are the fact that we pegged our budget at $75 per barrel, and he shared the information that we've seen an average of about $67 per barrel so far for the first half of this year. This is concerning because we know how much we depend on it. And like he said, oil production, unfortunately, is only 4% of our GDP. However, we depend on it. So that's where the skew happens. So what are the things that are hindering our ability to ramp up this oil production? And is 2 million barrels in this current climate even achievable? Well, some people might say that, first of all, the cost of production is one of our greatest challenges, is that by the time you get investors to come in and the cost for them to push out those barrels is just so high. And we haven't been able to really make an impact with regards to bringing those prices down, whether it be from technological investments, whether it be from ensuring that our structural bottlenecks are addressed. It seems to be a niggling issue that is hampering our ability to meet these very ambitious targets that we've set for ourselves. Now, this is unfortunately history repeating itself. I'm glad Dr. Bati picked on the theme of history repeating itself, because just last year, the NUPRC had reported that 90% of marginal oil fields that had been allocated to investors in past oil bid rounds remained dormant. If you remember, just about last week or 2 weeks ago, there was also a story where some people had raised concern that there were over 200 open blocks, that were not productive. The NUPRC responded and said, there's a concessionary process in place, they will become productive. However, I bring all these statistics up to say that this oil that we depend on, this oil that we put all of our hopes in, we're still not able to make efficient use of it. Whether it be those blocks that are productive and we're able to extract from, the statistics as to how much is being lost to vandalism and theft and so forth continue to fluctuate, but the numbers are far too high. And you'll see that if you look at some of the numbers that people play with, which is maybe around 400,000 barrels per day, you see that we can actually make our targets if we're able to create safety around our oil assets. Now, the other issue is that why is it that there's so much oil that is not being extracted? There's so many dormant oil blocks in the industry. I know all these things are being addressed. We're still waiting for an oil bid round for this year. However, there's still a lot of work to be done on that. Yes, we want to diversify, but this oil industry also needs to be efficient.